The director is not yet ready. I'm waiting for you. The Cali Secretariat of Nigeria, on a day like this, we are organizing a press conference in commemoration of the 5th anniversary of the encyclical letter of the Holy Father, Pope Francis, Laudato Si, signed and given to the world in September 2015. Today, I would want to speak to the press that the caption, "Taking Responsibility for the Future of Our Environment in the Quest for Fullness of Life for All." Perhaps today more than ever before, the reality of climate change, environmental degradation, and other ecological hazards have become evident in and around us. People all over the world in different regions and at different times and in diverse ways have become victims of one form of natural disaster or the other. Today, we are painfully aware of the debilitating impact of geophysical events such as earthquakes, tsunamis, volcanic eruptions, and other environmental disasters like hurricane and tropical storms, landslides, drought, and other catastrophes of nature. In the light of any of these experiences, humanity continues to be drifted into incalculable humanitarian crisis. All over the world, we experience people being forced to flee, to leave their homelands or places of habitual residence as a result of one of such natural or human-made disasters. Thus, we have millions of internally displaced persons, migrants and refugees, crisscrossing lands and rivers, seeking refuge and shelter for survival. Most time, a good number of these victims lose their lives on transit. And some other times, they face incalculable hostilities and indifference from diverse sources that make life and living unbearable. In fact, the ecological and environmental factors are mostly responsible for the misery and impoverishment among a teeming world population today. Apart from these terrors of nature, there are disasters that originate from man's excessive use and abuse of the environment. Excuse me. We would like to refer to these experiences as anthropological or human-made disasters arising from man's activities or otherwise against nature. For instance, the effects of depletion of renewable and non-renewable resources, desertification, deforestation, global warming, destruction of biodiversity, and pollution are gargantuan in nature. We experience daily how human activities on the environment continue to tarnish the quality of life and living, especially among the poor. However, the poor themselves contribute to the harm on the environment through their lifestyle, but the abuse from the industrial nations in their disproportionate consumption of 85% of the world's non-renewable energy is most devastating. We are therefore responsible for our woes. In the maze of the foregoing, man quickly forgets that the earth is a common home that ought to be cared for and preserved. Creation as a whole is sacred, and it is integral and knitted together in an incalculable networks of interconnectedness. In other words, what happens in one region of the world has its outcome in the other region. Life on earth is also interconnected, that no one is indeed an island. Take, for instance, the outbreak of the novel COVID-19 virus in Wuhan, China in December 2019 has reached all corners of the globe with its devastating fears, heightened tensions, infections, and deaths, putting the whole world, the whole of humanity in such a lockdown that has been terribly overwhelming and disastrous. As the whole world today is being gripped in the devastating experience of the novel coronavirus, with its daily toll of deaths in thousands across the globe, finding yet no vaccine for a cure, but locked up in suffering terrible economic recession and disorganization of cherished traditional habits of bonding and interactions among peers and friends, Caritas Nigeria, in response to the clarion call of the Dicastery for Integral Human Development, in collaboration with Caritas International, both in Rome, wished to landmark the 5th anniversary of the publication of the papal encyclical Laudato Si, meaning on the care for our common home, by Pope Francis. Laudato Si on care for our common home was a land-breaking encyclical of Pope Francis in 2015, calling the world attention to care, support, and reverence for all the Mother Earth, and indeed exalting deep respect for the entire creation. He was appalled by the wanton destruction of our environment and opined inter alia, "Never have we so hurt and mistreated our common home as we have done in the last 200 years. Yet, we are called to be instruments of God our Father, so that our planet might be what He desired when He created it, and corresponds with His plan for peace, beauty, and fullness." Laudato Si, number 53. This call was addressed to all men and women of goodwill to proactively contribute to the task of reshaping our environment in ways and means that would make the earth safe for human habitation, mutual sharing, and commitment to global peace. Caritas Nigeria, as the agency of the Cali Bishops' Conference of Nigeria for Integral Social Development and Humanitarian Relief Services, associates itself with actions, plans, and processes designed to renew and transform our common home from within. In her diverse social and humanitarian interventions across the country, she has been engaged in advocacy and policy matters among critical stakeholders for safe and habitable environment. Her internet paperless workflow system was an indigenous initiative that minimizes to the barest minimum the use of papers in its internal and external management processes. The campaign and mass mobilization of people for green environment, responsible lifestyle, and frugal use of renewable energy are successful outcomes in the fight against further destruction of the environment. In order to sustain the fight against continued degradation of the environment, Caritas Nigeria calls on government in Nigeria at all levels in their various domains of authority to effectively tackle the issues of waste management, waste segregation, waste disposal, and waste recycling. We are saddened by the volume of deadly waste being littered anywhere and everywhere in our cities and villages. Is there any wonder that the spread of airborne diseases and sicknesses are so rampant in our rank and file? This situation is hazardous for both private and public health of the populace. Government agencies and departments, including policy makers, town planners, environmental experts, and all men and women of goodwill should, as a matter of urgency, join in the crusade against further deterioration in the use and abuse of the environment for the survival of humanity. Climate change and the sudden loss of biodiversity, the clash between farmers and herders arising from the search for greener pastures for the cattle, and the reality of the ever-shrinking lakes and drying up of streams and rivers should be an early warning signal for urgent but unremitting interventions. The world needed collaboration and partnership across several spectrums. At the international level, for instance, there is no one country that will be able to sustain the fight for care and concern for the earth alone. There would always be the need for international cooperation and solidarity. Strong partnerships and collaborative networks among nations and its peoples are also indispensable for the success of habitable environment. The same is true at all levels, even within the borders of a nation. The current COVID-19 pandemic has made it once again evident that the world is a village, connected with one another in a way that is amazing. Through science and technology, the physical distance among people and nations have been displaced by a contagious social networking of mutual interconnectedness. We are not socially distanced from one another, but rather socially connected in our activities and their outcomes. And so even at individual, private, and public levels, a lot would be achieved if in our urban towns and rural villages, people are mobilized and galvanized to plant fruit-bearing trees and other forms of life-saving trees in and around our homes, public spaces, and around institutions and markets. There will be an abundance of energy saved and high quality of life enhanced if and when the populace adopt and use renewable and safe energy for domestic and industrial purposes. Our world would know more peace and harmony. Finally, we salute all of you here present, men and women of peace. Laudato Si invites us to a life of responsible and prudent use of resources. These resources of the earth are not endless in themselves. They can be totally depleted by our greed, and some of them are not renewable. Again, they do not belong to our generation alone. Generations yet to come have rights and duties towards creation. Intergenerational justice requires that we use resources of the earth in a sustainable way. The earth itself would not be able to sustain a further prolonged abuse and degradation. It would not be able to keep us in our avarice if we do not keep our needs within bounds. And so the die is cast for an urgent life in communion, mutual sharing, and solidarity with one another and with the entire creation. Thanks for your attention. God bless you.
Gentlemen of the contributions before the questions. Okay. If there's nothing, then we can attend to questions.
You said we are not socially distanced. Yes, we are socially connected and they want to begin to operate. I don't know.
I am personally of the opinion that our government has lost its orientations. The COVID-19 pandemic has demonstrated the ineptitude of our government and its inability to steer the ship of leadership aright. The lockdown has been eased off, and we are aware that even the easing off of the lockdown was not the best of decisions, in the context of the fact that there were more increasing number of infected persons, and there were not adequate and effective testing centers with equipments that are required. And so you discover that we are trying to ape other countries of the world, imitating their own systems without looking at our own indigenous situations and circumstances. And now again, after 2 weeks of relaxing the lockdown, it has been once again extended, meaning that we can still go on and on in our normal way of life and bonding when the virus still goes on in our midst. And the government is overwhelmed because they're speaking from both corners of the mouth. They're not able to handle the pandemic because nobody was prepared, and they were never even prepared. Even if they were to be prepared, they are not prepared. And that is also why it is important for individual persons to know that their own health and well-being is their own personal responsibilities. If I'm infected of the virus, it's not the government that was infected. So I should be able to take every adequate measures and precautions to avoid being infected. It is also laughable at this point that the government remains insensitive to the reality and for the need for religious gatherings. Coronavirus has demonstrated to us that neither science nor technology, nor inventions and all that has the final word. God has defied all our scholarship and all our ideas that a simple virus had kept the whole world to its knees. And therefore, there was still a point. Therefore, at this point, it's important and urgent that churches are allowed to go back and mosques to intensify their prayers, assembling the spiritual arsenals for this battle. They have seen that neither medicine nor pharmacy and pharmacology and all that have not yet helped us. And therefore, I find it for reasonable that the government immediately and without further delay allows churches and mosques to go back and allow the church and mosque authorities the responsibility to cater for their people. Put in place the requirements for protection, and that will do the country better than this senseless and directionless movement we have been drifted into.
Thank you very much. Yes. Going forward, just a second.
Yeah, my argument is if the government had the authority to lift assembly in the marketplaces, banks, yeah, and then why is it then not possible that the ban is lifted to congregations and churches and mosques? Markets and banks were termed as essential services. And it is surprising that a nation that is religious does not count churches and mosques as an important aspect of its societal life. It's a shame.
Okay, just going forward, we'll
But when you report to what we do, you see people reporting all the truth. And the church in Enugu, a very good church, they're going to demolition that because of flooding.
And when the government succeeded in dealing with the coup plotters, he, the president of a country, gave an instruction that the trees in the country of Chad be mowed down. Why? That was the places where the coup plotters were hiding, under the trees. You can see the cost of ignorance. You can see the volume of damage being done to the biosphere. You can see also that even in a contest, people, brothers, sisters in the villages fight over oranges and mangoes planted by the missionaries 30, 40 years ago, but are unable to plant today simple oranges by their compound, by their corners. And there are improvised species of oranges and trees that if you plant one today, in less than 2 years you begin to harvest, 3 years you harvest them. It is laziness. It is ignorance. And so my advice is that the environment, and we're living witnesses to its hazards. There are trees that we knew as children we don't see again today. There are fruits we knew before as infants in the early 70s that are not there today. These are already dead. But look at the damages in our areas. How the village women are howling the trees down in order to get firewood and all that. How also the industrialized nations come into Nigeria and mow down our trees by way of business and commerce and allow us empty. And we think it is quick money. And then we accept it, and then we would do no replacement. So my advice is that we become much more environmentally conscious, that the environment cannot keep us if we do not keep the environment. The hazards are very clear. We are seeing that the seasons are changing rapidly, having more rains, having very drastic sunshine, being uncomfortable in such environment. the desertification, the migration from the north to the south as a result of lack of water, the drought around us. These are evidences of degradations on the environment and the climate, and the effects are with us. And so the earlier we rise up to mitigate this, the better for all of us.
Thank you. Any other question?
It will be very much on the error and an error of overgeneralization to say that the church is doing nothing. It might be better to say, I have not experienced one, but be rest assured that in the 57 diocese of this country, something is going on, even if we do not understand them. Remember, it is a call for a change of lifestyle and attitude. Yeah? And it must take its own time. There are, as much as I know, among some JDPCs across the country that are emphasizing tree planting in and around the churches, in and around our homes. It has become a campaign program over the period. So these changes are going to take time to come to fruition. The church is also not just staying by the fence and on the fence. The church is also becoming very conscious of the implications of Laudato Si to make it its own document. There are efforts in some places that are translating, especially in the West, translating the Laudato Si to the local language so that people can also read and understand. There are some JDPs that are very, very far off in the implementation of the guidelines of Laudato Si in our everyday life. Also, Caritas Nigeria, in our own little way, are becoming conscious in the implications of observing resources, renewable energy, and then energies that can also be renewed in our use and in our processes. So it is a gradual thing, and we are coming to it.
And just to add that what is going on right now,
Here, and what the church has done over the period, and they can also share with the press in order to educate more the public. That's a wonderful one. The day I was there, on the 2nd of October 2016, so I